This video is for anyone who believes in the lies of global warming. If you have a friend or family member who has been tricked into believing, have them watch this video.
Boise, Idaho. The city recorded its hottest day at 106 degrees, beating out the old record of 105 degrees set in 1875. Now, officials, of course, are blaming this on global warming, and in 1875 they blamed it on summer.
The elite are manipulating the facts to obtain our approval so that we vote for change, which is laws that they will control and profit from them. They are fooling the people and using our ignorance against ourselves. Twisting the truth to make all of us believe, without actually thinking.
And these heat waves, and we expect to see a lot more of those as the global climate continues to rise. Aaron?
The most powerful in recorded history. Here's a question. Is climate change to blame?
Because some people suggest maybe there's a link to climate change.
While scientists can't say whether climate change contributed to this particular typhoon, they believe global warming is making storms stronger.
Striking is that warming trend cannot be explained by natural factors, but is caused by human activities, in particular by use of fossil fuels.
This is all pure manipulation and propaganda by the elite, twisting the truth and making you believe the lie. Let's look at this clip again by CNN, so we can listen to the facts of what is actually being said.
And these heat waves, and we expect to see a lot more of those as the global climate continues to rise. Aaron?
Of course the ice is melting. It's the time of the season. It's the time of year when the ice melts, like it does every single year. It's totally normal. But the elite need you to believe in their lie, which is why they sensationalize something that is normal, making it seem shocking, when it's just common sense.
And these heat waves, and we expect to see a lot more of those as the global climate continues to rise. Aaron?
Of course, heat waves. Because this is summertime, when the ice melts like it always does, during this seasonal time when our globe heats up, naturally. They are making the normal seem not normal, saying 7.2 million Olympic-sized pools of water melting, trying to make it seem shocking. Actually, it always melts this much. It's a cycle, going back and forth, year after year, century after century. This is why she even admits it on camera.
The visuals here are incredible. When you talk about 6 billion tons of water melted every day over those 3 days this week, it is really impossible to sort of comprehend the staggering size of that.
Well, this is peak melt season, and
this is peak melt season, and
well, this is peak melt season, and
this is peak melt season, and
So, 7.2 million Olympic-sized swimming pools melting at this time of year in Greenland is basically normal then. The truth is, the polar extremes are normal, from the hottest to the coolest times of the season, from winter and summer, or spring and fall. Back and forth, forming up, and melting down. These cycles of extremes are normal, just as day and night are. The polar extremes of opposite forces create the average, or balance in nature. Extremes in nature are perfectly normal, nothing to be scared of. Our Earth is exposed to extreme temperatures daily, from the freezing cold of night to the extreme heat of the hot, sunny day. The fact is, our Earth's climate is always changing. It sways back and forth, moving up and down, going through natural cycles that are extreme. These cycles create our weather patterns. Earth has always gone through ups and downs, heat and cold cycles, fire and ice cycles, since the creation of our Earth. Earth formed billions of years ago, it has, and always will go through ups and downs, polar extremes, of heat and cold cycles. The Earth is always changing, naturally of course because climate change is normal. Our Earth's climate is always changing, always has, and always will. The truth is, the Earth's climate is always changing. So, saying global climate change is like saying water is wet, of course it is. What was once an ocean will one day be a desert, and vice versa. This is why we find seashells in hot, dry deserts. The phrase climate change is actually normal, but it has been used by the elite to manipulate your opinion and understanding of what it actually means. Earth is all about cycles, and as we look over the Earth's geological timeline, we see the temperature of Earth going through cycles of ups and downs, lasting hundreds of thousands of years. going through hot and cold spells. In fact, Earth is much cooler now, compared to when it was formed, billions of years ago. The truth really is that Earth is actually in a cooling down phase, since it was formed billions of years ago. Look at the global warming chart they use to scare you with. The polar opposites look major, they look scary and extreme. But, in actuality, it is a minor percentage of less than 1 degree, but this is also not the truth. To be scientific, we must follow the scientific laws of logical proof and calculated facts. The truth is based upon data of measurement, and we must have equal controlled data. Notice they say since data was recorded. The record just started a few years ago. Earth cycles are not measured in just a few years. So, when they compare today's weather temperature with that from 1875, we must take into account several important factors. Remember, we are talking just 1 degree. So, is the modern thermometer calibrated exactly like the 1875 model? Seriously, no two thermometers are exactly the same, let alone one from the 1800s. This brings me to my next point. The fact that thermometers were invented just a few hundred years ago by Galileo. But, ask yourself how many thermometers were there worldwide in the 1500s? The 16, 17, or the 1800s? The data from these old thermometers is not true science or real data. Rather, it's general data at best. There were just a few thermometers collecting data around the world. It was not until the 19th century that thermometers were mass-produced and distributed around the world. My point is, our data of Earth's temperatures, its cycles, etc., are very limited compared to geological time. Another major point is, what are the controlled conditions of these so-called measurements of data? Collected in the same way. Same time of day. In the same position on Earth. Different thermometer makers. Were both thermometers placed in the same conditions? Out in the sun, or in the shade? On the ground, or in a tree? Next to water and trees, or in the middle of the road? These factors are so important when we are talking scientific data and trying to convince the public. Are these comparisons the same and accurate or vastly different? The difference from shade temperature compared to direct sunlight temperature is vastly different. Manipulation of the truth by the elite is easy to see if you pay attention to what's being said. They do not want us to see the big picture and to think for ourselves. They just want to try and make us believe in what they are trying to sell. This is why they only show a graph from just over 100 years ago, making it seem so drastic, with rising global temperatures, but the truth really is, that when we look at the last 500 million years even, Earth's temperatures are always fluctuating up and down. Look at the last 20,000 years and you'll notice we have been on a normal downswing, and is only recently starting to naturally climb back up and raise once again. So, of course the global climate is raising, because we are on an upswing in Earth's temperatures. Ask yourself, were humans to blame all of the thousands of times the Earth reached really high hot peak temperatures? Were humans to blame for all of the thousands of times Earth reached really low ice cold temperatures? Of course not, and humans are no more to blame for Earth's temperatures today either. Notice that they try and scare us by relating global temperatures and then ask if humans are to blame.
Equivocally, human beings are contributing to climate change. It's happening now.
Yes, that we are warming the world and humans are the big driver of that process.
What's striking is that warming trend cannot be explained by natural factors, but is caused by human activities.
This is a way of making you connect dots that are not connected at all, but by phrasing it like that, they make people assume they are connected. This is why they ask the question, are humans to blame? But notice they do not say directly that humans are to blame 100%. It's a manipulation phrase, like saying global warming, are frogs to blame? They try and say that humans are creating tons of carbon and this is why we have holes in our ozone layer, and that our Earth is heating up because of our human carbon emissions, but again this is total manipulation of the truth, trying to fool people into believing their lie. The Earth is on a normal upswing in temperatures and has nothing to do with our carbon emissions at all. Our weather is always changing, from boiling highs to freezing lows. Think about how much our weather changes in just one day, let alone 1 week, or months, or even years, let alone centuries. When the news reports the weather, how many data points was the information taken from? When they show us the weather on the news, notice the vast variables in temperatures across the city, across the state, or the entire United States. Let's say they took 20 different data readings of the temperature in just one state. A state is a very large landmass and the temperature ranges very drastically, all across the state. Even a city or a small town has drastic weather types at any one given time. Even in small areas, like a vineyard for example, there can be many micro-climates within one climate area. 20 data readings in one area is irrelevant to actual truth, because 20 data points of data don't account for the thousands of different temperatures ranges from those entire areas. There could be countless actual data with much higher highs or lower lows, but we don't have devices everywhere gathering that data. Even in a small town like in Hawaii for example, at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, one area can be cold, overcast and raining, but less than a mile away, it can be scorching hot and sunny, but drive another mile to the coastline, and it can still be hot, but with cooler breezes and very windy. So, if someone asked what the weather was like in Hawaii, there is not one real general answer, because there are many answers, not just one. The news gets its weather data from many sources nowadays, but only in the past 30 years or so has the data we gather been reliable and accurate to a relative standard. But even that data is not reliable because we have not mastered the geological patterns of Earth and Sun cycles.
And what about solar activity? Well, light from the sun has actually gotten stronger over time, but only by about 6% in the last billion years, so it's had a pretty minor effect. All of these factors make it hard, but not impossible to predict where we're headed. We do know that about 26,000 years ago, Earth reached its last glacial maximum, the peak of the 100,000-year cycle. So in approximately 74,000 years, eccentricity, precession, and sea ice should all align to make it very cold again.
What's striking is that warming trend cannot be explained by natural factors, but is caused by human activities. In particular, by use of fossil fuels.
Not too long ago, when the world warmed more than any human has ever seen, so far, this ancient warming took place over the course of just 200,000 years, the blink of an eye in geologic time, and it ended much like it began, suddenly and mysteriously. There were no polar ice caps, which meant sea levels were much higher, and the continents, which were just beginning to take a familiar shape, were covered in habitats like temperate forests and deserts, and a belt of rainforests around the equator. Marine sediment samples from Maryland to Antarctica show that about 56 million years ago, there was a sudden spike in the amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the oceans. And judging by the types of carbon found in these sediments, these gases likely came from organic matter, like plants. This means that a bunch of biogenic carbon must have suddenly been released into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases. But where did these gases come from? Well, one hypothesis is that there was a rash of massive wildfires that unleashed tons of CO2 that had been locked up in plants. Another model proposes that giant seams of coal were exposed to the heat of volcanic activity, which would have released the carbon from fossilized plants. Or it could be that an otherwise mild warming event triggered the release of greenhouse gases by melting deposits of a compound known as methane hydrate. Methane hydrate is similar to ice, but it contains molecules of methane trapped by molecules of water. And hydrates are usually stable as long as they're kept under a lot of pressure, like deep in the oceans, or if they're kept cold, like in permafrost, the thick layer of frozen soil that forms in cold climates. But if these places warm up, the hydrates melt, releasing bursts of methane, which is an even more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. And of course, the more warming that happens, the more melting there is, which releases even more greenhouse gases, creating a classic positive feedback loop. All told, the thermal maximum was a mixed bag for life on Earth, proving to be an important period for us mammals, but a major loss for some marine life. And like all dramatic events, the PETM did come to an end, although we're not sure how or why. Over the course of the Eocene epoch, the climate slowly began to cool, and although the temperature occasionally spiked again, it never reached the extremes of the maximum. Temperatures kept dropping during the Eocene, so much so, in fact, that by the end of the epoch 34 million years ago, polar ice caps had begun to form. But how did we get from rainforests near the poles to ice caps? Well, the cause of the initial cooling that actually stopped the PETM 53 million years ago remains a mystery.
Let's not forget that our Earth is gigantic, with a massive weather system. In fact, Earth is around 8,000 miles in diameter. That's around a 25-hour-long jet ride, going about 500 miles per hour. The pollution from these industrial companies is actually insignificant compared to the massive size of Earth. Earth's atmosphere is huge, and the tiny human activity, and so-called pollution is really nothing compared to the geology or geoscience relative to the massive planet Earth.
And the greatest arrogance of all, save the planet. What? Are these fucking people kidding me? Save the planet? We don't even know how to take care of ourselves yet. We haven't learned how to care for one another. We're gonna save the fucking planet? I'm getting tired of that shit. Tired of that shit. There is nothing wrong with the planet. Nothing wrong with the planet. The planet is fine. The people are fucked. Difference. The planet is fine. Compared to the people, the planet is doing great. It's been here 4.5 billion years. Did you ever think about the arithmetic? Planet has been here 4.5 billion years. We've been here, what, 100,000? Maybe 200,000? And we've only been engaged in heavy industry for a little over 200 years. 200 years versus 4.5 billion. And we have the conceit to think that somehow we're a threat? That somehow we're going to put in jeopardy this beautiful little blue-green ball that's just a-floating around the sun? The planet has been through a lot worse than us. Been through all kinds of things worse than us. Been through earthquakes, volcanoes, plate tectonics, continental drift, solar flares, sunspots, magnetic storms, the magnetic reversal of the poles, hundreds of thousands of years of bombardment by comets and asteroids and meteors, worldwide floods, tidal waves, worldwide fires, erosion, cosmic rays, recurring ice ages, and we think some plastic bags and some aluminum cans are going to make a difference? The planet isn't going anywhere. We are.
Just trust me on this. For as long as I have been alive, it's been hot in the summer. It's almost unbelievable. Some summers have been hotter than others. We all know that usually August is the hottest month of the year. And they're predicting that this coming August, for the month of August, it's going to be about 2 degrees hotter than the previous August. Well, let's take a minute and think about that. Here's what we should ask ourselves. Why is that even in the news?
Another important thing to realize is that if nobody ever said it, or if you never watched propaganda about global warming, you would never have naturally noticed it. Humans can't detect the exact temperature without instruments. We have no idea what the temperature is outside, unless we read it from a thermometer. Sure, we can guess, but a hot day is a hot day regardless if one day is 5 degrees hotter than it was from the previous day, for example. Be honest with yourself, there is no difference in Earth's weather from when you were a kid until this very day. The weather has been the same all your life, going through the seasons, hot spells, cold spells, rain or snow. Having freakish weather is absolutely normal too. Take Santa Barbara in California for example. It never snows there, but like 45 years ago when I was a kid, it actually snowed one day. But did we blame human global warming as the cause? Of course not. Do you actually believe that a 60-year-old man could walk outside today and honestly say, I can tell it's 1 degree warmer nowadays, compared to when he was a kid 50 years ago? Absolutely impossible. The only way people go around talking about global warming is because of the propaganda that was created all around them. Simply put, social programming of the elite. They need the public to stand behind the idea of a needed change. This way they can control the laws which will govern nature, a movement they have been working on for many years. In fact, most people are not aware that governments want control of the weather and have been working very diligently to obtain this man-made control over our weather or climate. Many thought it was just a conspiracy, for example, when it first came out that they were spraying chemtrails across the skies, confusing people with contrails. But then the government admitted to these and many more weather control projects that are now considered normal. One famous station is known as HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program in Alaska. HAARP's antennas can heat the ionosphere, opening holes in heaven, as it's known. We have no idea what long-term effects this dangerous weather program will have on Earth's climate in the future. Across the globe, governments are using weather modification and the public has no idea. You might have heard about cloud seeding, where they modify the natural weather claiming it brings more rainwater, reducing hail damage to cars and homes. They have been doing this for over 50 years already. The world elite have planned agendas, planned goals for the future, which is why the United Nations promotes global warming. We are not destroying our climate, the elite are. The nerve of humans to mess with Mother Nature.
Then you see these bands of very distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow, believe it or not. Military aircraft flying through the region is dropping chaff. Small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic, or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, that's what it is.
The sky. Now Matt has discovered a way to get the laser to pop all the way in the clouds. In theory, that's what starts a storm.
And they just need to be triggered now.
Does this concern you that you may be messing with Mother Nature and doing something that you don't completely understand up here in the cloud?
I mean, I suppose that's always a danger.
It's almost like an on-off switch for a thunderstorm.
That's the idea behind it.
Listen to the elitist, Bill Gates, on his coming weather modification projects.
Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth.
Hey, we need to cool the planet with solar geoengineering.
It would look something like this. Thousands of planes would fly very high and use nozzles to inject millions of tons of light-reflecting particles into the stratosphere. It would create a thin chemical cloud of those particles around the whole planet, blocking some sunlight from reaching the surface. It would mimic a giant volcanic eruption, which we know cools the Earth. A study last year found that no existing aircraft can inject the stratosphere at a high enough altitude, but developing a new high-altitude tanker would not be technologically difficult or prohibitively expensive. Nozzles still need to be designed that can continuously blast out trillions of particles, and scientists still need to decide what chemicals those particles should be made of. 3 years ago, the international community did come together when almost 200 countries signed the Paris Agreement on climate change.
And they had cores of ice that they had drilled. They had drilled 4,000 or 5,000 cores, and they only brought 15 or 20. So they're going through the second or third core, and they said 275,000 years ago, this was the temperature, blah, 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 blah. And then 55,000 years ago, the world was 2 degrees warmer Celsius than it is today. This is 2011. And, oh, wait, stop. And he said, and I said, well, you mean the whole world? He says, yes. And the poles are only benchmarks. And I said, well, what about the things that the young woman alluded to? Okay. And he said, it's all cyclical. And although the gas may have exacerbated it, in the cosmos of time, it's not a fart in the wind. If the water on the planet is going to rise up 10 feet, that means the southern part of the United States is gone. England is gone. Most of Europe is gone. And I can go, most of Central America is gone. Okay, if that's the case, let's just take Florida, for example, which is one of the fastest growing beachfront condominiums on the planet. In the prospectus, when you invest, there should be, in the footnotes, if global warming is for real, they won't put it that way, global warming happens and water rises 10 feet, this investment you made is fuck all. Not one single investment prospectus written since 2000, this century, has alluded to global warming. Not one motherfucker. If it were really true, the banks wouldn't invest. The banks wouldn't finance. Not one motherfucking condominium. So the people that have the money, and I'm jealous of the Vice President, Gore, I am jealous he came up with a scam before I did. Because the financial institutions, the banks of this world know it's not going to happen. Otherwise, you couldn't get a goddamn loan in London. You know those 30, 40-year mortgages? The world will be over by then. Is Barclays Bank going to give you a motherfucking loan? With the greatest respect, ma'am, it's the greatest fraud that's been perpetrated on mankind this century.